Hey there, Prepper Marine 81 here. This video is going to be part 3. The past two, if you haven't watched them yet, one was going over water, 2 was food, so I figured I'd do shelter on this one. If you aren't familiar with this series I just been doing, I just spent the last 35 days living out in the woods, and each one of these is going to be a key topic on something that was a lesson learned, basically in a certain area as far as survival goes. Shelter. I will have to say I learned a few things about shelter that I really kind of didn't anticipate until I got out there and was doing it. When I first did this, I started out with a tent, like a small 2-man Kelty tent. And that worked all right. It allowed me to, house all my gear, make sure it stayed dry, kept the bugs off me, that kind of thing. Because it was pretty warm when I was doing this for the most part of it. I want to say the last week, maybe week and a half or so, the temperature started to drop considerably. But for the majority of this, it was pretty hot, high 90s, mid to high 90s. And what I noticed immediately was a drawback of using a tent in this hot weather was it did not ventilate real well. Now keep in mind this tent, the whole top of this enclosure was all mesh, so it wasn't like it was a solid nylon that wouldn't prevent air to pass through. But the mesh, the holes on it, it's such a fine mesh to prevent small insects from coming into it that it really didn't allow wind to cut through it very easily, so it was almost worthless. Another drawback from a tent, in my opinion, is the nylon that they use in most of these tents, which most of them are UV protective, are not solid enough to block sunlight. So you still get a lot of that sunlight passing through, and if you're inside the tent, you just sit there and cook. It's like a little oven, and I tried to take the rain fly off to allow more air to pass through. That didn't really do anything. I tried to double that up over the back to create a sunscreen. That didn't really do anything. I ended up having to take a tarp and string it up behind as a wall to block the sunlight. That helped some to keep the sunlight off me, but the fact that there just was not hardly any ventilation running through the tent, it made it almost impossible to stay cool. And if you're somebody that has to sit there in 90+ degree weather all day long until the sun goes down, that's pretty miserable. Because there's nothing you can do. You can't just flip the AC on. You just got to sit there and suck it up. So I would definitely recommend, which is what I ended up going with, is a tarp in the end. Now, the most immediate drawback of a tarp as opposed to a tent, now I'm not saying that there aren't any tents out there that are suited for that kind of thing. I know that there's some high-end stuff, Sierra Designs and all that, and MSR, and, because I sell the shit. I know that there's some high-end tents out there that will do an adequate job, but unless you're somebody who has a lot of money to spend on that kind of gear, your average Joe, what I would recommend using is a tarp, actually 2 tarps. Now, and I say that because what I ended up doing was the tarp thing. Because of the fact that it wouldn't let any air through, and the sunlight would cut right through the tent, which it will with most tents, I found that the tarp, I used 2 tarps, and that worked a lot better. Basically what I did is I would set up one tarp as a sun block, a wall, and then use a second tarp as a floor. What that did is it kept any of the, obviously my back off of any kind of wet ground or anything like that. The other tarp sheltered me from any kind of rain, but it was so open that it allowed any breeze to come through to try to keep me cool. And that worked 10 times better than what the tent did. Now, the biggest downside, like I was going to say, of using tarps is the fact that you're not sealed off from the rain. In that sense, yes, a tent is going to work a lot better because it's completely enclosed. It's going to keep every bit of rain off of you. So that's something that you're going to have to deal with. Unless you, like I said, you got the money to buy in one of these high-end, tents that are made for that kind of thing that ventilate a little bit better, and so forth. But for your average Joe, I would definitely recommend rolling with just a couple tarps. Not to mention, plus the fact that it's going to be lighter weight, you're going to be more mobile. It's quicker to take down, by far quicker to take down. Um, you know, Easier to transport. Just overall, it's a lot easier to use. You just have to make a little bit of sacrifices when it comes to wet weather. Um, you will have to sacrifice a little bit with cold weather too, but because most tents don't really insulate at all, um, you're not really sacrificing a whole lot in that area. Uh, but I think that's really pretty much all I really learned as far as like shelter wise, as far as like what worked best, what didn't for me. And your situation is going to be different depending on what kind of climate you're in and stuff like that. But at least for me, and when I did it, that's what ended up working best for me. What I would probably end up using in the future. Um, and one other thing that I want to touch on real quick too is the fact that almost all tents are bright ass colors. None are subdued or camouflage. It's very difficult to find ones that are, and that are that kind of color scheme or military colored and still have the type of specifications that you want. It's very difficult to get everything all in one package. And that's why I like tarps too, is because you can buy tarps in a bunch of different colors. Brown, whatever, camoed. Uh, but anyway, that's my 2 cents on the whole shelter issue. That's what I'll end up rolling with. And if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, as always, feel free to leave them. I'm getting a lot of good feedback on this. I appreciate it. And as always, thanks for watching. Purple Marine 81 out.